Oh, you want to give me access so I can record this too,
Um,
if I
actually,
can.
you remember what I can do? I can
Yeah,
send you the link right when it's
that's
done.
right. And I can screen record it.
Yep,
Cheers.
yep,
Wonderful.
yep. Or you can probably try to screen record it now.
That's right. I'll do it after this is done. You can just send me
Okay.
the link.
All right, cool. All right, what's up, Nate, man? Welcome back, bro. I love these discussions with you, man. So I titled this one Jesus, and I titled it the who, what, when, whys, and hows about Jesus, basically, because that's who we're going to talk about is Jesus Christ. And part of my sources that I'm going to use are going to be, I wrote some notes down, and also got the four book set called The Life of Jesus Christ and Biblical Revelations, Volume 1, 2, 3, and 4. Of course, every book that I have tabs on them. So I went back and looked at some of these tabs that I found interesting and stuff like that. But let me ask you, man, who is Jesus Christ to you?
Well, I see him as a philosopher, a healer, and definitely a mystic. And one thing I can say to back up this claim is the text we have before us. We have here the Pharisees and Sadducees in a mix because they don't recognize this Sophia, as we find here in the English text. They'll tell you wisdom. This is Gnosticism. This is the name of the Holy Spirit being feminine. And down below, it's not just these miraculous powers, but this word here, Vimones, down at the very bottom. This can translate into ruler, divine ruler. So this means that the Pharisees are asking, who is this Sophia and who is this divine ruler they do not know? So this means that Jesus worshipped a different God. We find in the Gospel of Thomas, the oldest text in regards to Christianity containing the historical sayings of Jesus, we find here that Jesus states that we are all the sons and daughters of the living Father, of God. So right. We have God being both male and female, as us humans are in the image of God. So here we have a higher ruler. Now, when we do good deeds, such as love and compassion and observe the Sabbath and fast and pray and meditate, this is us enacting the both masculine and feminine qualities of God. So he's gone to an older tradition of God being beyond sex. Here we have Sophia being mentioned, the name of the Holy Spirit being God's feminine wisdom, also being the Hebrew Chokmah. Now, the Sadducees didn't believe in spirits. They only believed in Yahweh. The Pharisees, they believed in angels. They believed in Yahweh as well, but they didn't recognize the feminine concept of God. This would have belonged to the Jewish mystics, Gnostic Jewish sects, and the Essenes, some of which were also Gnostic. So here we have the feminine part of creation that has been taken out of a male-dominated now religion, which is pretty interesting. So not many Christians today, even many Jews today, and especially Muslims as well, all those of Abrahamic faiths, don't recognize or do not realize that there were multiple forms of ancient Judaism and multiple forms of Christianity. So in regards to who Jesus was speaking of, he was speaking of a higher God than Yahweh. We find many of the teachings of Yahweh not matching the teachings of Jesus. So Yahweh's religious, if you will, beliefs regarding Yahweh and those practicing Yahweh worship were male-dominated. So this doesn't match up with Jesus' teachings of equality. And again, being born in the image of God, being male and female.
You know, it's interesting that you mentioned the word teachings about Jesus Christ, because one thing that I've learned is that Jesus' teachings is something that you won't see anywhere else. He taught people how to, or he is trying to teach people how to, look within themselves to do certain things, how to protect certain individuals, how to heal certain individuals, and stuff like that. So his teachings were very, very amazing. And that's what I believe is still around more than just the physical aspect of, Jesus coming back from, wherever he's supposed to come from. He never left, his body, his mind might have left, but his teachings has always been there, and they've been there for a while. So that's why I'm very excited for this conversation, because
many of his followers also referred to as the Logos as well, with the meaning of God's word, God's thought, and God's reasoning.
Right. Yeah, and it's amazing to me because people will argue about whether Jesus Christ was real or not, right? They always argue, oh, Jesus, he wasn't real. And, it's the atheists that will deny him. And there's other people that would deny him, of course, because he was crucified. But they don't argue about the teachings. And that makes me wonder, why are you worried about whether this person was real or not if you know the teachings that they brought on this planet, right? They gave us something, or he gave us something, I should say, to do better, basically. So why is it such an argument about whether Jesus was real or not? There's no argument about the teachings, because you can't argue against being a good person. You can't argue against, doing the right thing for people and stuff like that. You can only argue whether the person was real or not. And to me, that's stupid.
Yeah, pretty much. But that being said, there were some that did argue with these teachings within the ancient sects, such as the sects of Marcion or other Gnostic Christian sects within Catholicism. It was mostly Catholicism that would argue, saying they had the only message, but they themselves were editing the text and editing the Gospels, which they were doing for centuries. One big thing that stands out, though, with Jesus, as you've mentioned before, is he was loved by the women and children, and that's very rare for those times. We find, unlike Yahweh's teachings, which was male-dominated, and also to stone women, to stone those he deems that don't believe in him, etc., Jesus does the opposite. He preaches equality of men, women, and children. He saves a woman from being stoned. Not just this, but in Matthew 8.6, Jesus states that anyone who causes a child to lose faith in him is better to tie a large millstone around the neck and cast himself out into the sea to drown. This means the children of God are not for sale. Now, if we find the proto-gospel of James, we find Mary, his mother, being donated to the temple. There she was described as a dove by the 5th century BC era, all the way to the AD era of the 5th century. Priestesses in the temple and virgin brides that were raised there were referred to as doves. So when we find Matthew 21.12, we have Jesus calling the Pharisees, the Sadducees, laestus, meaning pirates, human trafficker, a rebel. So he's calling them human traffickers of children.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this was a huge issue in the ancient past of child marriage as well. So the doves in the temple, these were also priestesses being sold to the Jewish elite. One of them was believed to carry the Messiah, to give birth to it. Child marriage was a huge issue everywhere, pretty much almost in the ancient world. Right is right, wrong is wrong. Doesn't matter if it was the times or not. So in Mark 14.48 to 49, we have Jesus being arrested illegally in the middle of the night. This is mostly due to him rescuing the prostitutes, which were associated with Jesus. So in this text, he states, did you have to come out with swords and clubs to arrest me as if I was a predator like you? I was in the temple for days preaching. We discussed this on our last chat as well. So he's stating that he's innocent. So they're coming out to arrest him illegally. But we go to Luke, the disciples are defending Jesus. This means they're not just defending Jesus, but the children, because we find in Mark 14.50 to 51, we find a young boy running away from the soldiers naked. So we go to Gospel of John 18.8. Jesus goes up to those about to arrest him and states, I am Jesus, arrest me, leave the others alone. So he's trying to protect the children here. So this makes a lot of sense here, especially with regarding to the children aren't for sale. Now, especially with these teachings of children are innocent, also blessing children. And a huge factor of this is the Gnostic Christians who wanted to be like Jesus themselves, the Christanos, little anointed ones, little Christ. And they would run through brothels to rescue children and women. And they themselves were turned into human candles by Nero. They were fed to lions and executed as rebels because they were rebelling against Rome by freeing their slaves. So because of their repeated deaths and because so many Christians were doing this, by the 3rd century AD, child rights were introduced into the world, which was a beautiful thing. So we have Jesus' mother being a victim of the sex trade. This is why Jesus is going to the temple, stopping it for 3 days. So when they crucified someone, they didn't crucify thieves, they crucified rebels. This is why they crucified Jesus as a rebel, because he rebelled against their authority. They asked him what right does he have to do this? he also went there with a crowd, so they were afraid of the crowd that he was with, so they would come in the middle of the night to capture him. We move on to the Talmud, which is important Jewish literature. This states that young girls were married off as soon as they hit puberty, as young as 6 to 9 to even 14. Mary, Jesus' mother, was 14, possibly even 12. So something else I want to get into, because this trade has been going on for such a long time. All the Abrahamic faiths, those who are practicing this faith, they don't realize, but their faith was built upon the sex trade. We find this with Father Abraham the pirate. If you can, I would like you to upload the text of Genesis 14.13, where they've censored, where they claim Abraham the Hebrew.
Yep, I'll do that right now. Genesis 14:13, the one that you was telling me about. Let's see. I think this is it right here. Right here. I hate all these ads, man.
Here we go. Abraham. Up the top there, pretty much, second one. And then the Parate. This was associated with piracy. This was also associated with the Euphrates River that was recorded by the ancient Greeks in Rome by being used by pirates, even by Canaanite pirates, as the Israelites are from the Canaanite people. It was later used by Islamic pirates to abduct women for their sex slave for forced marriages. Now, if we go into Genesis, I'll just read the English version from Genesis 14 onwards, after that text from 14.16. So after this is the reason they've gone out raiding too. They've been raided themselves. His nephew's been taken with his possessions. So now they're doing a raiding back, so a revenge attack. So Anna recovered the loot that had been taken. He also brought back his nephew Lot and his possessions, together with the women and the other prisoners. So they've taken their people as prisoners and their women, which would have been young. So these prisoners were being children to be raised up as slaves. So here, this means that Abraham wasn't actually a person, but this is remembrance of old Canaanite raiding parties and old victories. As there was a lot of glorified battles back in the day of telling off war stories. This is a common thing. Legends were built around war stories. So
you're right about that. You're right about that.
Yeah. And it also matches up with John, with Jesus stating in 8.44, when Jesus states to the Pharisees and Sadducees, they worship their father who is a devil. He's been a liar and murderer since the beginning. So since the beginning, those who worship him without raiding are abducting children.
How did you, let me ask you, how did you come into this? Because I know you're doing some translations of yourself, for yourself, right? So what made you come into wanting to know more about this? Was it when Jesus started flipping the tables and he was pissed off with what was going on?
Yeah.
Or?
I want to get to know Jesus a lot more. And so I started studying the ancient texts, and I start looking at more history, and I realized what was going on. And especially being Gnostic, that was what opened more doors to me to actually understand the text and what I was looking at. So it's crazy. And it's simply, you can just use a translator yourself, a dictionary, encyclopedia, look up meanings of words and language. And that's a game changer, because a lot of words were translated in the modern tongue. If something doesn't feel right, if you start reading Greek, you'll see certain words come up that mean something else. They're using a different word. You can spot this out. But yeah, it really takes a Gnostic eye to actually look at this. And that was my original plan. As soon as I was Gnostic, I started delving in deeper. So,
you know, it's amazing you said the words changing and stuff like that, because one word that I just came across that has been used since the beginning of time is I'm not going to say the beginning of time, but at least from the beginning, sometime in the beginning, is the word missiles. And those refer to bow and arrows basically, right? And now when we talk about them in our era now, most people think that there's some kind of metallic metal type thing that it comes from some type of it's basically a projectile that explodes, right? And it's a funny, because arrows were called missiles back then. So that's one way that things can change, because if you tell somebody who doesn't know anything about ancient texts, who doesn't know anything about really anything about our modern times like that, they're just in the woods somewhere or somewhere out there by themselves, right? And you tell them, and they know the word, at least what missiles are, right? And whichever way they know it as a projectile blowing up or a bow and arrow, they will look at you and and disgust when you tell them what your idea of what a missile is. So yeah, I understand that. And I'm like you too, man. I wanted to know who Jesus was, right? I mean, there's churches everywhere. People talk about being Christian. They're talking about Jesus, and then they use Jesus and God as one and the same, and so on and so forth. And as I dug into the text, I noticed that God was totally different than who Jesus was. Matter of fact, Jesus disobeyed a lot of what God has put on our planet for us to follow as part of rules, right? The Sabbath, for instance, right? There are scriptures in there where Jesus said you can, quote unquote, in so many different ways, work on the Sabbath, right? If something was needed to be done, you would do it, right? But on that day in the Old Testament, you had to rest, and you had to, basically pray to the Lord, depending on what sect you was from, I guess. And the date fell on different times too, right? Sometimes it was Friday to Sunday. Sometimes it was Saturday to Sunday. Some people just say Sunday, right? And people mostly only go to church on Sundays anyway around here. I mean, yeah, they have some people have what they call a Wednesday mass or some, I don't know. They have different things, different places, basically, right? And I wanted to know who Jesus was. I wanted to know who he was. And when I learned about him and why he was mad at flipping the tables, and we had this discussion last time, which can be found on the YouTube channel, it made me wonder, what was the real reason why they crucified him? All he did was go around and tell people to look within themselves, take care of others, heal others, and just do right. And he tried to teach people how to live a better life than what they were living now, basically.
Yep.
So there was no reason why to crucify him. I know people say, well, he went around talking about that he was God. Well, if you actually read the Bible, it does say in so many scriptures, and I can't remember one. I think it's like, I can't remember, but there's one that
Psalms.
Yeah, Psalms. Yeah, I know. Yeah,
ye are gods.
Exactly, right? So it literally says that. Right. Now, I know that's during the Jesus time frame, and people, say, well, you can't follow that. You have to look at the Old Testament. But in the Old Testament, it gives you descriptions that a Messiah, or somebody like a Messiah, or somebody like Jesus, I should say, is going to come back. So
it just in the Wisdom of Solomon, for instance, really good one. It doesn't say Messiah by word, but it says someone will come claiming to be the Son of God. Yeah. And they will kill him basically in the most terrible way, which is very interesting. And that's one reason why it was rejected from the Hebrew Bible. Yeah, basically as well. But that's what I mean. Like, it's the word of God, basically, from within us. So the reason why they wanted to hijack the image of Jesus is because you wouldn't need the church anymore. You wouldn't need the synagogues. You wouldn't need their religious leaders anymore. You'd build a connection with God yourself, which is the message Jesus was teaching. He also had the opposite message to, say, Abraham and Moses, who said, steal from those who don't belong to us. They also encouraged and allowed child marriage.
Right.
Muhammad also did the same. Jesus stands out because he protected children, was against all this as well. And he was against the harm of women. Many of the followers of Jesus were women. Many of the early Christian leaders were women. So it was a big message of equality. So he challenged the traditions. He challenged the authority of the time. That's what got you killed. And this is why you see him speaking in parables, because it was dangerous to speak about certain things. And this is why they want to stone him, call him blasphemous. And this is why you see even Gnostic Christians writing in code. It was dangerous to speak about your rulers. Now people think of archons as these demonic beings. What they actually talk about is their politicians, their corrupt rulers of the time, the material rulers. So it's the ego mind, the carnal desires, and trying to rule over
the
others.
Word ego.
And yeah, it was dangerous to speak about that back then. You couldn't speak about your kings or the ones ruling your state. That was a death sentence. They put it in code. And Jesus was doing the same thing in his parables. That's why it takes crucial study. Even the outcast and poor, the sick, prostitutes, they looked down at him for hanging out with him. But these prostitutes, there's very little mentioning of prostitutes. We just know he was hanging out with them. They were the children and stuff he saved, and also women that were victims of the sex trade. But we also find the word daemon so many times in the Bible. This does not mean demon. It means God and spirit. So we have Jesus getting rid of other gods with a higher God, or casting out, say, spirits, or converting people. So Mary Magdalene, having 7 demons cast out of her, means she worshipped 7 gods. So he's got rid of her 7 gods in worship of a higher God. So this is what they've forgotten. And even human sacrificing, child sacrifice, be viewed as demonic. Yahweh was accepting of this. We find this in Numbers 31.32 to 35. There's 16,000 virgins to be demanded, which would be aged 9 to 14, possibly younger, to be forced into marriages. That's disgusting. We find 32 possibly to sacrifice in Judges 11 to 12. Jephthah sacrifices his only virgin daughter to Yahweh. So Canaanites were sacrificing their children to their gods. The Israelites were a Canaanite tribe. But the Essenes or other early Jewish sects that arrived started to split from this sect out of disgust, but doesn't mean all Israelites were, because some were recorded worshipping the same gods as other Canaanites, which is hilarious. So we look at this, it points towards Jesus being a philosopher, a healer, a mystic, a wise man.
I'm glad you used that word. I'm so glad you used that word, wise man. And I'm going to tell you why. Because I've read all of Plato's books that is available to the general public, right? Or at least that I think that I know of that's to the general public, right? I have all his books. I've read them. In one of his books, Cratylus, Cratylus, he actually has a discussion, or there's a discussion with Socrates. I believe it's with Socrates and somebody else, or just Socrates is talking. I can't remember exactly how it's played out, but I know that Socrates actually gives us a description what a daemon is. And when you read it, it's known as a wise man, an honorable man who died. Okay, that's what the definition that Socrates put out for Damon. I put this out on YouTube. I put this out on Twitter. I've put this out on Facebook. You know, I took the picture of the book. I took the picture of what it actually says, and somebody actually backed it up. Matter of fact, we was having this discussion before last time, and I showed you. There was somebody who sent me a picture of their book with what the definition or meaning of demon is in their book, and it actually said the same thing that mine said, right? And his name was Lil Vibe. He took a picture of it and showed me, so it verified what a demon is. So now my question is, just like my question I had about who is Jesus Christ and what he stood for, is why would they say in Greek time frame that demons were wise men or honorable men who died? Why would they say that? Right? Why would be the reason that they would describe, if I was to go back in that time travel back and ask him, hey, what is a demon? And he says, well, it's a wise man, an honorable man that died. And I'm going to question him, why do you say demon? And then later on in life, we consider demons these, ugly looking, despicable I don't even know what to call them. Things, right?
A mixture of Zoroastrianism as well, because they had like the evil spirit beings, and
Yeah, and that's another thing. Zoroastrianism is considered, in many cases, some people would say, that it's the oldest monotheistic religion, or one of the oldest monotheistic religions. But guess where that started at? In Iran.
Yeah.
So it just makes you think, what is really Christianity, right? Because in many ways you can go back there and people won't live those same ways and, practice the same traditions as they did back thousands of years ago. But there is a small group of people who do.
Yeah. So it was a new philosophical movement.
Yeah, basically. Exactly. Yeah, and we got a comment on here that says because it's all psyop, right? And that makes me wonder, like, what's the point of hiding what a demon is, right? Because if you read the Bible in many ways, I get the notion that knowledge is important and that you're supposed to read. But then if you think about it, the most wisest people, the most intelligent people back then were all burnt on stakes or something like that, or murdered, right?
They want to hide the humanity of these people, basically, and glorify them to make them more godlike. And daemon as well means God. When you mentioned before, passing on, that would mean passing on being a spirit, and passed on being deified, remembered after death. That was simply a daemon. Someone being reborn and adopted by God, etc., will be recognized as a daemon. Jesus would be recognized as a daemon as well.
So in your eyes, or from your understanding and your interpretation, you would say that Jesus is a daemon?
Yeah.
Interesting.
If you remembered after death, I say that applies to anyone, basically, really. That's basically what the context meant. But there were greater daemons than others. You know,
Yeah,
you had greater heroes.
Elohim, the word Elohim is a perfect example, right?
Yeah.
There are many gods, but there's one all powerful. Now, I understand that there's an all powerful, but there's not. You can't be an all powerful and an all knowing. We know that because when you read the Bible, God didn't know that Adam and Eve ate from the tree of knowledge, and He specifically asked them who told them that they could eat from the tree, right? He wouldn't have asked that question if He was an all knowing God. So to me, that was a different God, especially knowing that He was walking through the garden and Adam and Eve went to hide behind the bush because they heard Him coming. So that means God was in the physical form, right? Meaning that He was in the physical form before He was in Jesus form, because Adam and Eve were created where? On planet Earth. Where is the Garden of Eden? On planet Earth. So that means before God walked, in many cases, what people believe, that God and Jesus are one and the same, because God incarnated Himself and He came out through Jesus in a physical form. That can't necessarily be true if He was heard walking through the Garden of Eden. Now, if I'm reading a piece of material, I don't care what it is, whether it's a mythology book, a historian book, a peer-reviewed article, or just a local guy like me and you who love history so much that we share what we've learned. If I'm reading something, I am trying to picture it in my head, okay? Because to me, I work better with pictures. I have to see it, right? Reading is one thing, but picturing it helps me understand it better, basically. So what I'm saying, what I mean by that is when I'm reading, the movie is playing in my head of what I'm reading. So if they're saying, if I read in the Bible that Adam and Eve went to hide behind the tree, went to hide behind the bush, and God, was walking through the Garden of Eden, I'm going to think that somebody that I can't physically, how can I say it, identify, because I don't know who this individual is, right? Because they say you can't see God's face, but obviously Adam and Eve was talking face to face to God. I mean, so to me, I would say, okay, it would be a blank face, but I would have like what would be a human-like individual walking through the Garden of Eden. That's how I would see it. And that's why I say that me personally, Jesus and God are two different individuals, because Jesus taught us to do one thing and God told us to do another thing. Well, let me rephrase that. God told us to do one thing and Jesus wanted us, just to, expand on our knowledge, basically.
Yeah, because Jesus Lord said no one's seen God, no one's heard Him. So, so that means no mortal has, but only comes through the Spirit. So He was telling people to go in, and no one in His time or in His generation was looking within themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So it was just traditions of men. Another thing they want to hide too is the drugs as well. If you look at, say, Matthew 14.14, if you want, you can load this up. You'll find the word therapeo. And you'll find this means healing, but doesn't just mean healing. This means to serve someone. This is used in medical textbooks within ancient Greece. It also means to medically heal, to medically cure them. So to medically heal. And this is because herbal medicine, cannabis, other such usage was seen as divine properties that healed someone. It wasn't their substance that healed or received the vision. It was the divine properties. So the blessings of God that allowed the insight to the mystery.
Right.
So yeah, check it out if you want. Load up Matthew 14.14 and look for the word where it says healing. Matthew, and you'll find therapeo, and you can copy and paste the word. They butchered a word there on Bible Hub, by the way, too. So, but yeah.
You want me to do the Greek version or?
Yes. Look at the Greek version of Matthew 14.14.
Let's see. The Bible Hub one is one you want me to pull up?
Yeah. I really like Matthew. Before I like John, when I start translating Matthew to myself, wow, it's heavy Gnostic. So I'm really enjoying it.
Hold on, let me do this real quick. Let me do this real quick, bro. Matthew 14:14.
They also say Matthew's the most Jewish. I say it's the most Gnostic Jewish.
I hate these ads, bro. These ads be getting on my nerves.
Yeah, the ads suck.
All right, so
cool. Yep. Scroll down.
Okay.
And look for the healing. Okay. Yeah, healed. See that word therapeo? Copy and paste it and look up the word. It probably tells you something there different, but copy and paste the actual Greek word if you want. because I only tell you so much on here. He healed them, but this word was used in Greek medical text as serving someone medically. Okay. So this was used as a doctor or a physician.
Hold on,
So this could also apply to divine healing as well. As even doctors that were healing people, it was seen not as their medical practices, but the divine properties of their healing. It was still seen as the will of the gods or of God. And this is what people don't understand.
All right, hold on. Let's see. Hold on, let me see. Okay, let me close that one. Let me bring up the other one. That's interesting, man. It's fucking interesting. All right, here we go. This one right here.
Cool, beautiful.
Bill Mounts.
Yeah, say to serve, to give help, take care of, or another extension, to heal, cure, to be healed. Heal, cure. So this is what they're hiding.
Pass, to receive service, to serve, minister to, render service and attendance, to render divine service, worship. And it gives you Acts 17:25.
Yeah, it was used many times. Most of the healings you see is using this word.
Here we go.
And you also find within, I forgot what text, I've translated it myself, but it's when he heals the young boy with the seizures. It stenches he uses a remedy. And again, this traces back with this word as well. And this all makes sense. So here he's a medical practitioner being educated. We have Jesus traveling by boat. He has a home within the Greek text. He doesn't fit this wandering, uneducated bum, but rather a well-educated man. And no doubt he would be educated in medicinal practices. This would be considered spiritual practices, religious practices.
Now, this one is an interesting one right here. I don't know why this one just popped up like this, but you know how the universe always works.
And say he's healed her. He's applied this healing to her bleeding. So he's using herbal remedies.
So this is what's interesting to me. When I read this, I hear, okay, it says, now there was a woman who had suffered a flow of blood for 12 years, but she was not able to. And then it says right here, the whatever, is trying to get at. Then it says healed by anyone. Now, what's interesting is this sounds like a menstrual for 12 years. So that means that's something that's not normally something.
It could also be when someone, how people fall over and they bleed real easy within the body. It could be also that sort of stuff as well. So
now, that's what I was going to say. When I read that with minimum knowledge, I guess you can say that sounds like a menstrual. But there are people who would get cut and they will not stop bleeding. I can't remember what the medical term for that is.
I've forgotten it as well. But yes, you're right.
That could be another thing. Like if somebody was to read, hey, a woman suffered flow of blood for 12 years, first thing that would pop in their mind is a menstrual period, right? But now, my question is that not only did they practice circumcision on men or boys back in that time, could they have messed up and did something like that? Because they did that the same thing with women. There's still African tribes that do that still in Africa, right? And but somebody could have messed up some there, and Jesus came to heal them. Or it could have just been many women that were struggling for 12 years because they weren't doing it the right way. They was trying to force their man beliefs on women. And that's what would cause them. He said, you can't do that to women. You can't do that about
what else that is as well. Underage sex basically suffered, you know what I mean? That was very common back then. He's healing these people. So this is why he's rescuing women. He's rescuing them from the abuse of older men. And this is what they're hiding from people. So this is because all the Abrahamic faiths that Jesus challenged were built upon this practice.
Yeah, and that's what I'm saying. Jesus had teachings that literally was, oh shoot.
And this is why
I didn't even read
people hate him.
Let me read this, man. I'm surprised I missed this one. Okay, Luke 8:2, it says, as well as certain women who had been healed from evil spirits and diseases, in parentheses, Mary, who is called Magdalene, from whom 7 demons had gone out. Demons,
So gods, this could be also spirits.
But they made it a point to
this could also be men as well. This could be 7 men. So this could be 7 men abusing her as well. It could be multiple different things if you find it. This is why they hide this. So again, this is why men hated Jesus because their women were running away and following him. He was protecting a lot of them.
And you
this
know,
is why
back
he's
then,
gone by boat as well. He's traveling from place to place. He's gone around helping, healing, wherever he goes. He has crowds following. He doesn't want to be worshipped. He's fleeing away from them, just going around the village, helping and healing. And eventually he accepts it and he gathers the crowd and he's like, fuck it. I'm putting a stop to this shit. And he goes straight to the temple. He calls the predators, preach the predators. He starts whipping them. He frees the kids. He goes, you've turned this temple into a drug den, to a spalion, into a den of human traffickers. And that's why you have the children praising him as the son of David. And if he was related to David, he's of royal lineage. You also have Zoroastrians coming to him at his birth to come worship him, giving him frankincense and myrrh, which can also be medical appliances. So here he's been educated. He had a high standing. So he had authority. He was popular, but he was more popular than other people of nobility because he was of the common birth as well. So he was a distant member of the royal family, but he's standing up to the tyrants. That's cool. So this is why it makes him so much different, because he's the first person in history to do so. Plato condemned sexual acts with young boys as well. He didn't like it. He didn't mind homosexuality, even though the term wasn't then, but this is between male soldiers. He considered them as brotherly in arms and who would be prepared to fight for each other and who loved each other, but they were still expected to take on a female wife to pass on their seed. But when he's seen the older men of Athens trying to seduce younger boys, and Athens within this place was bad for it, the Spartans would mock the Athenians. Well, rich Athenian families would hire bodyguards to protect their children from the rich nobles. So this shit was common back then. So we have Jesus challenging all this. We see the Gnostic Christians and Gnostic Jewish communities challenging this also and risking death for this. So it's crazy when you see this. This is why the Pharisees hate him and why they state, you use Baal to cast out these gods, like demons. And he says, well, if I use Baal, who do you use? Meaning they're using his brother Yahweh, another lesser god.
You know, Baal means Lord, right? That's where we get the word
Lord.
So, yeah, and that's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. People don't. This is what confuses me, is when I hear people talk about God and they say the Lord God.
Yeah,
I'm like, okay, so are you saying Baal God? Are you talking about that one? Because if you go to the first time that word was used, it meant Baal.
Yeah, Yahweh and Baal could be the same God as well, because it can both mean Lord and Baal can be entitled for Yahweh.
But guess who Yahweh was? He was known as the God of war.
Yeah, just like Baal. They're both war and storm gods, and both married to Asherah, and both had Asherah as their mother.
So when I hear people say, yeah, I praise the Lord God, I'm like, oh, so you praise Baal then? And they're like, no, I praise God. The one in the Old Testament, there's only one God. I said, yeah, but when you go to the actual beginning, you know, that's what it means.
It's interesting too. When they call Jesus Lord as well, for instance, the certain word they use is a different word to this. It can mean sir as well, a master.
Yeah, or master. Yeah. And this is what's interesting, because you know I have a lot of tabs on my books, and I have one of these tabs on here. Do you consider Jesus an angel?
I consider us all to be angels. So you know.
But okay, so why?
In that concept, like I think we all have the ability to do good and bad. You know, so not actual physical angel. I mean, like actual, you know, spiritually. I'm talking about. Angel-wise, I believe that, being agnostic, I believe angels are loved ones that have passed on, basically, or say us if we move on, if we've achieved that higher level, or whatever, if we have nothing left to experience, so nothing left to learn, basically. Yeah, it's my thing. So when you say you see an angel, basically in a vision or something like that, I say that's a concept of you that you're seeing, your higher self. I can see this as an ancestor visiting you, etc. Your own spiritual experience, basically. Who am I to defy it, you know, or to question it? It's our own. We all have our own unique spiritual experiences and understandings of these experiences. But ancient Judaism, it was so diverse, not all believed in angels. The Sadducees, for instance, Second Temple period Judaism, and before them, did not believe in angels. There were groups that did, though. But before 200 BC, there was no names for angels, and this names of angel angelic beings, and sometimes there were humans that became angels, by the way, which is why I say what I mentioned before.
Mm.
But this came from Zoroastrianism, the names of angels. There was no reward or punishment system regarding after death so much until the introduction of Zoroastrianism. The belief was once you died, you went into dust, or you simply went to heaven, or you ceased to be. But yeah, it was interesting.
Okay, because the reason why I say that is because this is the next question. This is going to be a controversy question, like always, right? But there's this when remember when the Torah and Shroud came out, or Shroud or Torah, I can't remember how to say it, which way it goes, but
yeah,
you know how people were, it was like a couple of weeks ago where an individual was saying, oh, we finally got, you know, backed up evidence that this actually goes back 2,000 years, and some people believe that it's actually Jesus. And the reason why I asked if Jesus was an angel to you,
I love what you put there too.
Yeah, yeah, and this is what I'm going into. This is the reason why I asked, because when I go to what an angel is, it's just basically a messenger of God, meaning somebody,
just us.
Yeah, anybody, right? Anybody can be an angel, right? It just depends on the person that's receiving that message, whether they believe that person's an angel and all this other stuff. I mean, it can go left, right, up and down, however way people want to take it. But in reality, an angel is a messenger of God. They're just basically a messenger. And in every ancient text that I've read, most of these gods were what we know as in the sky. Well, what's in the sky? Mountains. When you look at most of these guys, they sat on top of mountains, or they sat above higher ground than the people below them. And they always sent individuals from the top of those places to the bottom. Like, for instance, if you go to the pyramids in Mesoamerica, you know how on the top of it, they have a little enclosure where somebody could sit at and, you know, do whatever they need to do. And, you know, you got Machu Picchu, and, you know, you got all these places on high ground, right? Even in ancient Egypt, the pyramids are on a higher ground than what is below. And when people will come down from there and send out messages to the people, they will be known as messengers. Now, here's the controversy part right here. If Jesus is an angel and he is a messenger, and however anybody wants to take that, in this book that I have, okay, it's the first one. It's the Life of Jesus Christ, you know, like I said, volume 1 of it. And I got a tab in here, and it says Job was unspeakably gentle, affable, just, and benevolent. He assisted all in need. He was too exceeding pure and very familiar with God, who communicated with him through an angel, or, and this is what they have in parentheses or in quotations, a white man. Now, this is interesting to me because this book, I can't remember how old this book is. It goes back to like let's see, 1700. Okay, so this is by Blessed Anne Catherine Emmerich, and she was born 1774 and died in 1824. Okay, she was a mystic, a stigmatist, and a visionary and prophet. Right, she's very renowned over there on the side of the world. This is a very interesting book. Like I showed you, I have the Virgin Mary versions of this, and it's just interesting to me because I was I was on Twitter earlier, and somebody posted, I can't remember who it was. They posted like a figure of what could be like the Virgin Mary, and the sun was behind her, but the sun was part of her head, and it was blocking her face and stuff like that. And the question was something like, is this something in the realm of, does this person look like a white woman to the Caucasian individuals? And what I've learned through my research is it wasn't the color of the individual skin that they were talking about. They were talking about their cloaks. Like some people had purple cloaks because they were royalty. Some people had white cloaks because they were divine individuals, or there's so many different things for the color white, like pure and stuff like that. But I told him I felt like the only people who talk about actually skin color are the individuals who are trying to create a narrative for what's going on, because they never actually talked about color back then. It was always it wasn't the color of their skin, it was the color of what they wore. You know, the traditional outfits. That's how you could tell somebody from a different place, was because of their outfits, their clothing. You know, if you was in Egypt and you went to Greek, you would see how Greeks wear their attire and stuff like that and look different. But because the Greeks took over Egypt and at one point, you could see a mixture of that, right? You could see a mixture of traditional African wardrobe with Greek wardrobe, right? And the same thing with Mesoamerica, Mesopotamia, and all around the world. And Jesus has always been known to have clean attire, right? So to me, it's interesting just to know that, you know, they consider an angel or a white man identical. And I say that because it's always in the form of a cloak. I always felt out. So that, and I want to take your, and the reason why I brought this up was because there was a time, and I still kind of think about this. Okay, if you look at Jewish people today, they're typically white individuals, right? Caucasian individuals, right? And we know there are, you know, brown people, black people who are Jewish, right? But I used to think, because of, like you said, how you earlier, you wanted to learn about Jesus and who he was and stuff like that. With all the crazy stuff that's going on with wars or the color of the skin and individuals and so on and so forth, everybody wants their God to look like them, right? It's almost disrespectful to the people that believe something different, because God did have a chosen people, right? And
according to some text.
Exactly. According to some text, he had a chosen people. So if he had a chosen people, that means those individuals would look like God, because in the Bible says, make God in the likeness of it, make these individuals in the likeness of us in so many different ways, right? Yeah. And it's interesting to me because when you actually read the text for yourself, it's almost like, how can I say it? Jesus wasn't what they expected, right?
Another thing is too, with the white man, or in some regards to the man, could be universally applied to woman. Example, that can regard to the soul as well as a light being. So you see examples of the heavenly cloak example. So something's beyond the flesh. This is the soul. To cloak yourself with the spirit.
Yeah, exactly. And see, that's why I'm glad that's why I asked that, because that shroud was very big. A lot of people was talking about that, man, and you know, a lot of people were saying, see, Jesus was white, and then some people were saying, no, you know, in the Bible it says bronze feet. You know, you can take that however you want to, but why are we arguing about, like I said earlier, why are we arguing about what Jesus looked like? And you know,
a lot of that, actually, believe it or not, it came before the whole slave crap and shit like that too. When I say the slave crap too, I mean like the Americas and stuff in England, their involvement. So go back to Islam. You find the hadiths, very racist stuff in there. And this is going back to the 7th century, 10th century and stuff, examples. So here we have, say, kill anyone that states the prophet is black. This is horrible. So I find it a lot to do with social classes, with the obsession around Islam changing the Middle Eastern customs. Otherwise, it was mostly considered on one's language or family status. So around then, but even within race differences, when the world kind of got somewhat divided early on because of conquest, before in the days of Egypt, Mesopotamia, Wales, it was a lot more universal. People were doing more trading, influence each other's religions. There was more poetic and philosophical exchanges. Then later on, more empires formed, more people divided borders, for example, too. You find, I forgot this emperor's name. He was a Roman emperor. He was born in the African region, province of Rome. People say, oh, he's black because he's in Africa. Well, no, he was a Roman. And when he first seen an Ethiopian man, he was shocked by his skin color. We find examples, like, say, when the, is it Ishki or Ishkaki, the African man who was over in Japan, who became a samurai, who was originally a slave and became Anga's bodyguard, and he was shocked.
Man, people were so, man, that
people were done back then, for sure. But even in regards to being humans being created, a lot of times it was all race of man and all race of women, and we were all in the image of God. So God being beyond, it was the form itself, which is interesting, or the spirit. So depending on the context or depending on the cultural use, some regarded God in physical form, some rather had an image. All varied in different beliefs. So this would be the same in Judaism and Christianity as well. Some believe God had a physical form. Some Canaanites believed Yahweh had a physical form. Some Israelites did as well believe Yahweh had a giant penis, for instance, which is weird. Some even had Asherah, his wife, having a penis, being of a somewhat we would call transgender, I guess, not the right word. What's the bloody word?
Hermaphrodite.
Hermaphrodite, that's the word, right there. So it's like the past was weird. They were really obsessed with sex, not so much gender, but they were obsessed with sex, fertility.
Yeah,
you know?
yeah, they definitely they definitely were, man. They were fascinated with it because you know, a lot of people don't realize this, but if you actually look at some of their artifacts and you actually go to, you know, the sexual side of their artifacts, they have crazy stuff. Like they think, you know, drawings, depictions, you know, the Kama Sutra. I mean, they got all kinds of stuff, right? I mean, all around the world. And there was a time when it was open, like people would, you know, if they wanted to, you know, do that type of stuff in the open, they would, right? And in many cases, Jesus' teachings was to tell us that's behind closed doors. That's between a man and a woman. And meaning that at that time they were saying a couple, a man and a woman today would be the way we would say it today. But back then that's for, you know, individuals for private company, you know, that's between them. Not everybody should know about that, see that, or witness that, right? And that's why I say, you know, Jesus' teachings is amazing. You know, I've been saying it for the last hour. People will argue about who Jesus was. That's why I brought up, you know, what it says in this book from 1800s, right? This is from the 17 and 1800s when they said, you know, angel or a white man, right? And I say that, and I bring this up because what would be the reason why you would deny Jesus? Like me personally, I don't see how or why somebody would want to do that. I don't see why somebody would say, oh, that's not the Messiah. That's not the one that God sent us. And I say that because all he taught us was good stuff. It took me a really, really long time to understand it, because when I grew up in the Catholic Church. And then, of course, you know, I'm growing up in the South and stuff like that, you know, the Baptist churches and stuff like that. You know, most of the time when I would go to church, everybody would talk about how bad, down, and out they were, and how they had faith and love and faith, basically faith and love for God, and eventually their lives turned around, right? Okay, so God put you in a position, then he brought you out. That's what people believe, right? And that's what they would talk about in church. And I was like, well, I want to know about the Bible. So I got tired of hearing people's personal stories, because just because God is doing something nice for you right now, simultaneously, somebody else is getting the shit in the stick. And guess what? You're sitting here praising God. This person is saying, why is God doing this to me? Is this the same God? And if it is, then why is God doing two different things to two different people? And the individuals will say, well, God wouldn't do anything for you that you can't handle. Well, why in the hell is suicide so high?
Yep.
Right? If God, it just doesn't make sense. There's a lot of people committing suicide. So that's obviously there's something they couldn't handle. Right?
Yep.
And they may and a lot of them have faith and believe and trust in God, right? Some of them go to church, some of them are practice Christianity to the T, but because something overburdened them or whatever the case may be, they ended their own life.
Yeah.
Now,
also the fear of hell and heaven as well, and all that sort of stuff too, can play havoc on the mind too.
Yes, exactly. So that's why I say, like, what would be the reason to deny Jesus? Okay, first of all, why would you want to go kill a child? And God has been known to do that too, kill certain children, right? I mean, this is not me saying it from my interpretation or my translation. I'm really reading it. I'm literally reading it from multiple different sources, okay, including the Bible. I have an 1873 Bible right here in front of me, and I can tell you that it says the Pope of Rome is the devil, is Satan. It literally says that.
And the first people to call out the Pope were the Gnostic Christians too, which is why they suffered.
And that's why I brought that up.
Church.
Gnostics. We've been having discussions for over a year and a half now. We've had these so much. We go back and forth. We support each other's pages, YouTube. We have conversations. We are not just somebody who posts something on Facebook or Twitter or whatever and then get a million people to reply to that. We want to have discussions with different people. So you are an author, a published author. Okay. You have a book out. Okay.
Yeah.
Very interesting, very well written, a lot of information in it. And you're a Gnostic, right? And Gnostics, when they brought to the table, from what I understand, is forbidden. I'm not going to say forbidden information, knowledge that wasn't supposed to be given to us. I don't want to say forbidden because that's it depends who you are.
Understood by a chosen few.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's like the disciples of Jesus. Jesus wouldn't speak to any crowd without a parable. His disciples even asked him why. And he says, to you, you've been given the gnosis of the kingdom of the heavens, which has also been somewhat
Jesus
hidden as well.
Like how
also, I just think I also want to point out too, before I forget.
No, go ahead.
The followers of Jesus. Now, the Canaanites were bad people, blah, 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 according to the Bible. Well, one of Jesus' disciples was a Canaanite. Jesus had Greeks following him. He had multiple different Jews following him, from the Essenes, Sadducees, and Pharisees. Some of their sects, most of them hated him, but minor offshoots, some did. Essenes were various different communities with their own beliefs, but we have Zoroastrians following him too. These are Persians. So this meaning that he's most likely able to speak all their languages. The funny thing is Greek was the popular language back then. Hebrew wasn't fully a living language because it suffered from the Babylonian exile. Though they were brought back, they would have to rebuild their languages while they borrowed from the Greeks. When the Romans kicked them out, their language was no longer a living language. And again, they had to borrow from the Greeks. And their language changed. Because of this, also, they would borrow from the Greeks at children that they would edit to make their own Hebrew Bible because it was too popular amongst ancient Christians. And Christians stopped using it because it was too popular amongst Gnostic Christians. But even the Catholics, this wasn't a group. This started off as a philosophical group. Basically, we got groups together. So universal, so meaning Gnostic Christians, Jewish Christians, and what you would call the Catholics later on, which would be proto-Orthodoxy. So this would be Gentile Christians, basically, so non-Jewish. So these groups got along. Later on, it would form into the Roman Catholic Church, to where they would start exiling other groups to separate them from their version of Christianity. You find Marcellina, a Gnostic Christian of the 2nd century. She was invited to Rome for Pope Insidious' papacy. So she was invited there to be a witness for a pope becoming pope. So Gnostic Christianity was a huge part of it. It was seen as they were known for their insight, spiritual insight. So most Christians would go to them to understand the meanings of Jesus' parables and such. So with them, you didn't need the Romans. You didn't need the hierarchy, so they didn't like that. So they want to split around. It's when they changed Jesus to lifting up to the sky instead of you finding Jesus within you, because again, you wouldn't need their church. So there was no profit in that. And even during the time of Jesus, the nobility spoke Hebrew, the lower classes spoke Aramaic and Greek, and there was different dialects of Aramaic. So not all the Aramaic speakers could communicate with each other, thus they used Greek. So you would seem like a middle ground of gibberish, basically, someone speaking half Aramaic and then all of a sudden pull out some Greek words. Now, this is not too far-fetched to imagine, because you find an early Coptic text called Proto-Coptic, which is when Coptic languages start to develop itself, which is Egyptian, also influenced by the Greek. You find a mixture of Coptic and Greek words within ancient Christian text. So, but I still state within this, Jesus knew multiple languages and thus more popular. So he would have been telling sermons to the crowds in different languages, which is interesting.
Right.
And also explains his popularity.
Okay, so this is interesting to me, man. Hold on, let's see. I'm going to read this part right here, man. It's from this book. It's The Kings Arrive at Bethlehem. It says, I saw the kings leaving Jerusalem in the same order in which they had come. They left by a gate to the south. First, Mensor, the youngest, then Seir, and lastly, Theochino. They were followed by a crowd as far as a brook outside the city. And here, the rabble left them and turned back home. On the opposite side of the brook, the kings halted and looked for their star. To their great joy, they saw it. And on again, they went singing sweetly. But what I wondered, and this is according to Emmerich, the author, of course, but what I wondered at was that the star did not guide them by a direct route from Jerusalem to Bethlehem. They went more to the west and past a little city that is well known to me. Beyond the same, I saw them halting at a beautiful place to pray. A well sprang up before them. They dismounted and dug a basin for the water, surrounding it with sand and sods. They remained here several hours and watered their beasts, for in Jerusalem, on account of their anxiety and trouble, they had no rest. Now hold on, let me finish. This is interesting. And this is what I tabbed up because like I said, I love tabs on my books, man. The star, which by night,
vision.
This is in regards to just the kings arriving to Bethlehem.
Okay.
Yeah, just I guess just to see Jesus. But this is a more in-depth story, right? And it says the star, which by night looked like a globe of light, now had the appearance of the moon when seen by day, but still it did not appear exactly round, but somewhat pointed. Now, what is mostly a star is drawn like?
Points.
So it just makes sense to me that could have been just a star that helped them travel. And that's all that really is. When we look at how, because we was mentioning about earlier about people coming to visit Jesus and stuff like that, right?
Like the Zoroastrians, they were stargazers, following the stars, exactly. And drug dealers and drug takers. Like they were recorded having a vision about Herod's deceit or whatever, but they did this in a dream. So this means they've been smoking their hashish and opium mixed together for their divine vision, their divine warning. Which is interesting.
But because when you talked about the paraphernalia that they were using and stuff like that back then, the whatever herbs, spices, or whatever got them high or whatnot, the star was always something that they looked at to meditate. And Jesus taught people that all the time, to meditate, look within, right? But my question now is, why would that be important in the book to tell me? And that makes me wonder, okay, now when I go back and think about that, some of the oldest drawn stars are either, some people will argue, are either in Africa or Mesopotamia, right? Egypt or Mesopotamia. I just got done reading a book called Signs and Symbols. I can't remember who it's by. I believe it's by Alan Church. I can't remember the name of the author who had it, but I posted it. It's just Signs and Symbols. I could look it up later. But anyway, it's interesting because every god or every individual that's worshipped as a god, individuals that were led to them or to him or whoever it was by a pointed star. So what makes this one different than all the other ones that came before that, right?
Yeah. The only big difference, I would say, honestly, is the rescuing and saving of children and women. That's the thing that makes them stand out. If I lived in those times and I didn't know a drop about medical practices or knowledge, I didn't know that boiling water would save my life. And I seen this dude come out of nowhere and start healing people and saving prostitutes and saving children, I would call him a god too.
Right.
Especially with that concept of what people believe. People believe that gods would shapeshift. There were early beliefs of Jesus shapeshifting, so divine that he didn't take a poo, which is kind of funny because in Gospel of Matthew, Jesus states it's not what comes out of your mouth that defiles. So what goes into your mouth that defiles you, but what comes out of it. Don't you know that once you eat, what passes through the stomach goes out into the latrine or sewer? So he's talking about taking a shit, which is funny. But some Gnostic Christians even believe this too. Valentinus, the Roman Catholic Church, was huge on it. They would talk about the millennial reign later on and how Jesus is so divine he didn't defecate because it was human sin, bullshit like that. So
it's
they want to take away Jesus' humanity.
It's funny you talked about that the guys don't poo. The way you said it was because there's a North Korean president that was looked like that in today's world.
He got it from there.
You think so? It's so crazy because people what I want to. I bet you there's so much missing information out there in North Korea, bro. I'm telling you, man. The history there too, just by itself. Come on, man. I know we're missing all kinds of ancient sites that we'll never be able to see.
100%. There were huge
destroyed
battles
documents. Man,
there.
it's crazy. But you know, to me, because this discussion was about Jesus, and of course we're going to do another series. We're going to keep doing this one because this is going to be pretty long. To me, I just cannot understand, see, or rationalize what Jesus did to go through what he was described as, put on a cross, speared on the side, dehydrated, humiliated, spat on. All he did was teach healings. No matter who you think Jesus is, if you don't believe him because the letter J didn't come into, around 1500, that's fine. Go with whatever you want to go with, right? Because language changes. The word Jesus probably won't even be used 3,000 years from now. It might be some shit other than that, right? I mean, language will change. English might not even be around 3,000 years from now, right? So it's obvious that the name is going to change. And that's why I said I can't fathom how people argue about what Jesus looked like or if he was real or not, because obviously he gave us teachings. If you read, if somebody says, well, somebody made that shit up in the Bible, it's all made up, it's not, none of it is accurate, then you're telling me that somebody sat here, made some stories up, right? But some of those stories are to help people and heal people, and it teaches you how to do that. So now, what do you make that person who did that? Are you just going to ignore the damn information that's in there? Or are you going to, and you know what? You said this about 30 minutes ago too. Ego is such a freaking bad thing on this one, man. Fuck that. It's the worst shit in the world, man. Because with all this information out here, everybody, all I see on Twitter every single day is people arguing about stupid shit, right? Whether UFOs are real or not, right? Okay, whatever. Whether God is real or not, okay, whatever. All right. Who built the pyramids? Okay, whatever. If you really wanted to know the goddamn truth, you would talk to individuals live and get real live word. Let people act stupid on webcam. Let them act stupid. You can easily mute them, continue with somebody else. But nobody wants to do it because two things: ego and money. That's all the ego gets in their way because they want the money. They want to be the richest person on there. They want to brag about what they have. I made it out this and I did this and I all blah, blah, blah. Okay, that's fine. That's good. You got money. You paid. Okay. Now that person that's broke as shit out there, all those homeless people out there, or the people that you can be really helping. Oh, I help people. I give a couple of $1,000 away and do this, that, and the third. Okay, you give a little bit away to make yourself feel good, but you could do more by putting more people on, and they would do the same thing. But you want all the goddamn credit, and that's what's wrong with this, with our history, with the UFO is, trying to understand. We live in a country right now, or most of us live in countries right now where we can have discussions with anybody, right? You're in Australia, I'm in Georgia. It is 4:30 in the morning for me. Okay. We are taking the time, and this is not bullshit. You literally have a published book. You are translating text. Yeah, you don't have the fanciest house or the nicest cars and shit like that. Your richness is in your mind. What I had a discussion with my wife yesterday. She said, we was talking about being rich. I feel like I'm the richest man in the world. I got a loving family. I got a nice ass house that I feel like is nice. I don't have the biggest house or anything like that. I have a house. That's all that, a place to live. That's all that matters to me, right? I have a nice ass car that I like. It's a basic truck, but it's nice to me. I don't need a Mercedes. I don't need no Bentley. I don't need, jets, and I don't need all that. Everything that I have are in these books. I love reading. And I cannot pick up one book and sit here and say, this information is right. I question everything that I read. That's why I read so much different material. If I read everything about aliens, then guess what? Everything is going to be fucking aliens. Everything. It doesn't matter. Right? It doesn't matter. And I'm going to find material that's going to back up my narrative. Right? It always is. It's always going to happen. There are thousands and thousands and thousands of books with people who say they are PhD recipients. They're experts, right? They have PhDs in these fields. They're geologists, geneticists, so on and so forth. Okay, you have that. You can claim that. You went to school. You put your hours in. You put your time in. But what makes it different than somebody like me and you who reads your material faithfully and share what you read or share what you know? What's the difference? Yes, you may know some stuff that you're not telling me, and I might not know, but that doesn't take away that I don't know what you're talking about. And if you spend 10 years on one subject, and I spend 10 years on two subjects, that means that the information that I know from the second subject, you may not know, and that might be beneficial to you. Right?
100%.
It keeps you from going another 10 years trying to research what I researched. All I have to do is say, hey, this is what I found important and interesting so far from this, that, and the third, and I give it to you. Now it's up to you to say, okay, do I want to take it further? How hard is it to back up shit today? You got freaking ChatGPT that will help you back up shit. You can find damn near everything on the internet, one way or another, right?
A lot of people don't want to admit they're wrong either, especially with the scholarly field. And I can admit that I'm still learning. I'm still relearning. I thought I had a lot of answers. And when I come across learning Greek, well, I've got a lot of relearning to. And even stuff in my book, like I think one or two things I made a mistake on. There's even a spelling mistake or two I've done as well. I can admit that when I make another book, there's going to be some stuff in there that I've got to edit.
That's the best books. People, yeah. I've heard people say you can't believe everything from before World War I and World War II. Okay, you can't believe everything from World War I, World War II. Okay, fine. What about the shit that they got wrong before that? You know, if they got something wrong and they revised it later on because they had better and more updated information, then you're failing yourself by just sticking in the old world. Yes, there are going to be things that they're going to change and this, that, and that. And I'll give you a prime example. One of the most important things to me is knowing about who the Anunnaki/Enuna is. And the only reason why is because according to most scholars and people who are respected that I respect, and there's a whole university that, plays the part of trying to figure this out, is that the Enuna/Anunnaki is where most of the stories from Christianity comes from. Right. Or I should say the Abrahamic faith. And I say that because Abraham came around 2000 BC. Well, guess what? The Anuna and Anunnaki was around 2000 BC. Right. And then when you play the word.
Well, we're raiders. People that took drugs, fasted, did prayers to receive their divine mysteries. I tell a lot of people, it doesn't matter what religion, take away the drugs, you won't have it. That's a hardcore fact right there. Even Christianity, I don't care. Gnosticism, I don't care. Your Anunnaki faith, I don't care. Your Thai Buddhist, or you just invented it on the spot. No drugs, no religion. This is how it was back then. Without your fasting or your prayer, there was no divine insight.
I actually put this on my I put a chapter in my book. I'm on chapter 10 of my book. I only have 2 more chapters to do on my book. But I did a chapter on basically the mind, right? And basically, just to give a quick, easy idea of what I mean, is like how the mind can play tricks on you. You mentioned the word fasting. If you fast long enough, your mind will play tricks on you, right? Will make you see things that you normally wouldn't see. Most people, when they fast maybe one day, 1 to 7 days, maybe,
They're indulging the diet.
Yeah, but how many people actually fast for 40 days, right? Yeah,
not very often. It can be dangerous too. Exactly. Like, even when we smoke, like, that's an indulgence to die. We don't realize this. It's something that's certain. It's a mystical experience itself. It's a psychedelic experience when you're lying there dying.
Right. Right. And that's why I say, to me, it's important to understand, how these people lived back then. Jesus was an individual who was fed up with a lot of shit. Okay. I can tell you right now, he was fed up with a lot of shit. When somebody's flipping tables, they're pissed. They're pissed. It takes a lot to flip a table. And back then they had them big ass wood tables too. He was pretty pissed off to lift that thing off the ground.
And he also called his followers, you miserable wenches. I forgot what text. He goes, how much longer must I put up with you? Bring the child to me and I'll heal them. And that was regarding with applying the remedy. So he's saying, what the hell are you doing? Even to his disciples, he's saying he's showing them how to do this. And they still argued. And he stated that after I die, that you're going to mess it up and there's going to be these different people claiming my name. You're going to always have the poor with you, but you're not always going to have me. So this is what he states to them. He knew they were going to corrupt the message. We see ancient Gnostic Christian text warning of the rising power of the Roman Church and how they would sleep with men, harm children, and launch war. And they did. They were correct. So it was a warning of what we can become. And Jesus' message is what the earth could become if we practice love and compassion. So turning it into heaven.
Yeah, exactly. Because in reality, there are 10 heavens, right? Or at least from what I've read so far from.
Yeah, there's 10, 732. It all varies.
Yeah, it varies. But from what I've read, the 10th one is where God resides at. So whatever the highest number it is where God resides at, right? You know, I've come to learning that, you know, when it comes to Jesus, you know, like I said, and I'll say it over and over again, people will argue about what he looked like and if he was real or not. But one thing they don't argue about is the teachings. And to me, that stands out important to me because for the simple fact of the many ideas of why I know Jesus was pissed. Okay. I don't think Jesus talked to people softly. I don't think he was like, hey guys, you know, don't do this.
I think he was stern, emotional. I think sometimes probably cried, you know, and he was angry as well.
Every emotion you can possibly think of. Just like you said, he was probably mad. He was probably crying. He was probably sad. You know, there were so many emotions that went on, but I know he had to be pissed once he flipped that table.
Yeah.
And there's no telling how many times he's done that, you know?
Yeah. And you wouldn't get angry over birds.
Yeah, exactly.
Like you see vegan activists, for example, where he would have risked death for that. When you see children, that would be a natural instinct to risk your life to save a child. In any compassionate human being, I challenge them, put them in that situation. They are going to stand up for that child. You know, they're going to risk their life.
So that's why I say, you know, for me, I wanted to know, you know, why was he so pissed? And then what did he do to go through what he did? You know, there was the people that wanted Jesus crucified was going to let a murderer loose.
Yeah.
Right? They rather wanted
it was also one of their messiahs.
But think about that.
Barabbas also meant Jesus too. It was a messiah of the zealots.
Yeah, so just think about that. Who are these people to sit here and say somebody should die and they want a murderer loose? Somebody who was healing, saving lives.
To also make sense too, the Pharisees wanted him because they also believed in Messiah. Some of them viewed a Messiah as a threat to usurp Rome. Some of them wanted a Messiah to throw away Rome. So that's probably what they thought Barabbas was. And later on, there was a Jewish revolt not long after Jesus' death. They failed.
Now let me ask you this. Okay, this is something that just doesn't make sense to me, and I can't ever get the answer. And I've asked the question so many times to this individual. Most people know who Billy Carson is, right? And he has this book called The Emerald Tablets. And in his book, he actually says that Jesus and Thoth are possibly one and the same, according to his opinion. Now, Thoth was the individual who weighed the heart of men, right, on the scale, right? And they were the ones he was the one that determined their faith and so on and so forth, right? And he's also in charge of writing. He brought us, you know, the calendar and so on and so forth. And he was also part of helping create individuals because Thoth and Ningazida are one and the same. Ningazida is the Sumerian version of Thoth, right? And you also know Thoth as Kukulkan and Quetzalcoatl, right? So when I read that Jesus and Thoth was the same by Billy Carson, because that's when I first came into learning that was from him. I couldn't see that for two reasons. One, because there's no story about Thoth going through what he went through. Now I understand that Thoth had different incarnations of himself. You know, he was Hermes, he was Kukulkan, Quetzalcoatl. So many people say so many different things.
Right there, the incarnation, that was the original belief regarding them being the same figure. It was the same soul.
Yeah. And I still don't understand that. But like I was telling you earlier when I was reading that book, Signs and Symbols,
in that book, it talks about how, these different gods were individuals. I want to say, how can I say it? We're all one and the same, right? That they were just a different version. So, like, how Jesus was when he was a little kid. There are some texts, I can't remember exactly where I read it at, but there is part of the Apocrypha and some of the hidden books that's not in the Bible. I'm trying to find it in my 1873's Bible just to verify. But correct me if I'm wrong. Jesus Christ, when he was
Infancy
little,
Gospels.
it could be. Jesus was also a person who was testing his abilities when he was a little kid.
Yeah, still learning. You see that in the infancy gospel. Infancy Gospel Thomas. Some people confuse it for the Gospel Thomas, completely different works.
Yeah,
But yeah, the Infancy Gospel mentions Jesus still learning, and he even killed other kids as well for simply shoving into him, then raises them up, all that sort of stuff. And then here he learns Greek, and then he learns Hebrew, which is interesting as well. That was a very popular text amongst early Christians. They call it Gnostic Christianity, but no, wasn't a Gnostic Christian text. It's an early Christian text, Gospel Thomas, Gnostic, but we have different here. This is more, as I said, just early Christianity. This was written after his death, obviously, of Christians trying to understand where he came from. So his backstory,
Yeah, and that's I got to go through these books and read them again to see if I can find that, because I actually read that after I read these books. So I want to go back in here and see if I can find something where he was actually doing stuff. And I probably did. I just, I got to go through these tabs. And that's one of the reasons why I'm actually going through each and every book that I've read and actually not reading the tabs per se, but reading what I've actually learned from the text, because it helps me refresh my memory. Now, Jesus, to me, no matter how you look at him or that individual, you can't take away that the teachings was nothing but good. I just can't. It's stuck in my head to just sit here and just think that thousands of years ago, there were grown ass men out there who was mad at an individual for trying to teach people how to heal, teach people how to meditate, teach people how to.
They were making money off the people, and he was taking away their profit. He was taking away their control.
This is what's interesting to me. You said money and profit. So
yes,
I had a discussion with somebody, and they said that the Vikings and the Templars were working together. Now, I don't agree with that at all. And the reason why is because from my minimum knowledge of them, and I've read a couple of books on both of them, the Vikings were people who would take religious artifacts, right? And then sell them back to the religious people for a profit. The Templars, and these people, first of all, the Templars and the Vikings weren't around at the same time period. They came two different time frames. But the Templars were people or individuals who were protecting of those artifacts and were helping people. And I call them bodyguards for people who wanted to go to their respectable places to worship their God, right? So, and I bring that up because we discussed about the Vikings and that Arabic writing on their ring that they had. And when I came to realizing more about that and thinking about that discussion, because whenever I've had discussion with somebody, I always play what I've, mentally can in my head of what they said and try to, research what they said just for backup knowledge, because, if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. Right. So I went back and did my due diligence in the research, and I found out, or what I came to conclude was that some of the stuff that the Vikings kept or raided and took from churches, they kept certain artifacts for themselves. And that's probably how that Viking ended up with that ring that had Arabic on it, because it was something like, oh, that's a pretty cool ring, I'll just keep that, right? And never sold it back. So these artifacts will go places to places. So whoever had it may not necessarily knew what that artifact was or how important it was. And some people, I heard somebody say that same day too, that might have been Solomon's ring. And that's why that Viking kept it. Now, when I was growing up, we used to have what they call mood rings. I don't know if they still have those around. You wear a little mood ring.
I know what you're talking about.
And it would tell you basically your your mood, right? Now, is it possible that certain people could probably look at that and be like, "Oh, I see red. That means fiery uh, individual. I need to, set a fire something up, right? Like I need to do something what a fire would do, right? Conquer, take
Probably.
over, or something like that." And I
Fire was
say
also
that
seen as very sacred back then as well. Some even believed fire was the gift of God, or was the spiritual concept of God, or gazing into the fire was gazing into God, or one could gaze into visions by gazing into the fire,
that's what I was going with.
etc. Yeah.
That's where I was going with the visions, because we talked about the visions of Jesus and the meditation and stuff. If individuals could look at certain things like that, have some kind of mindset, a placebo effect.
Mind-altering states and fire, man.
Exactly.
Long time that's been happening for.
Exactly. So that's why, to me personally, I just cannot see how or what Jesus did to deserve what he did, what he went through. Whether he was black, whether he was white, whether he had blonde hair, blue eyes, whatever the case may be, whether he was tall, short, or whatever the case may be. I don't care what he looked like. Nobody's going to know. If I was going to make an educated guess, I'm going to say he looked like the typical Iraqi, Afghanistan looking type individual. And I've been there, so I know what they look like. So people can take that for whatever it's worth. But if I was going to make an educated guess, that's what I would assume. But that doesn't
Also,
mean
that
anything.
makes perfect sense, because the Romans couldn't tell them apart from the other Jews. They had to have Judas there to point out which one Jesus was.
That's what and I'm glad you brought that up. See, I like how our conversations flow, because we compliment each other on how we want these conversations. These are never planned out. We take our own individual notes and we just let the discussion go. And that's why I say ego is a big problem with this stuff, because I'm learning stuff from you, you're learning stuff from me. We're going to go back, do our due diligence, and research what we both talked about. But ego takes that a lot away from everybody. I cannot tell you how many times I get on Twitter and I'm just like, thank you for sharing this. Thank you for sharing this. I appreciate you for sharing, because there's nothing more to say but thank you for sharing this, because I want to know more about it. We've had many discussions about Jesus. I remember the last discussion we talked about, and I just posted it. I'm going to show you again. Is the one with the mushroom. Remember when you was telling me he was a mushroom? That there are certain sects in Mexico, I believe it is, that worship a. Can you go into depth in that?
A Jesus figure into the magic mushroom.
Yeah,
that's in Mexico. That's it's interesting, because I think they founded around 19th century, but that belief goes back into earlier Christianity of the 1st and 2nd, 3rd centuries. Even the belief that Jesus was a divine spirit, that one would take a mushroom, red and white one, in order to receive a vision, that in order to contact the Christ spirit, believing that Christ wasn't actually of a body, but was a divine spirit. So they didn't only believe that he would be partaken in the mushroom, they just believed that was the concept of doing it afterwards, that this was how ancient Christians were first able to discover this person or spirit. But it was also through the use of a psychedelic state. So there were Gnostic Christians that didn't believe Jesus existed, but rather was a metaphor for you to be like this individual, or for you to contact this spirit in order to take on the spirit yourself, to sacrifice yourself, to form into this being, basically, as well. Beliefs would vary. It was something interesting as well. Jesus states with stating that no man or no woman and no angel has seen God. Now, if you look at the Mahaja, which is that name, sorry if I do, Mahaja, whatever. So they were Jewish Gnostics of the 1st century BC era. They're actually the ancestors, or one of the ancestors of the Essenes. Some record them as an Essene sect. This is true, because they were before the Essenes, and as their group formed and split subgroups, Essenes formed, making them an Essene sect. So they believed that God was beyond this material world, didn't interact with it, but rather it was created through his creative power by the use of angels and lesser gods. So all the instances of the biblical text, what we call the Jewish Bible, all the animalistic or human-like traits of God are actually the angels or angelic beings or the lesser gods that rule over different realms. And you've got the most highest realm mentioned before, that's where God is. So he's above all this, as it's too perfect to interact with this world. So the part of us that belongs to God is our spirit. And in turn, the angels and gods play up, saying that they're jealous because they don't know this other God and they want us to worship him, but we're more superior than them because of the soul within us, the creative property of God, the divine spark. And that's why we will ascend beyond even the angels and the planets. Most people associate the planets with the gods. So that was an early
Yeah.
1st century BC era belief. That's before Jesus. So Jesus belonging to an Essene sect probably took on some of these beliefs as well.
That's funny you say that about the stars and the gods and the constellations and all that stuff, because every text that I've read so far, every god has been known to have a planet of some sort, right?
Yeah.
That nobody can argue that, right? And going back to when I was talking about the pointed star, when you go to the pointed star, you see that with the god Anu/An, right? Which is the Sumerian god. An is the Sumerian version, right? An, that's his name.
Yeah. And you got the sons of
Anu,
Nu for Anarchy,
yeah.
similar to
Anu,
Elohim.
exactly. Anu is the Egyptian version.
Mhm.
Now, Anu, the Egyptian version, the depiction of their god is older than the Mesopotamian ones, the ones from Sumer, Akkadians, Babylon, Chaldea, and so on and so forth. And I mentioned Chaldea, and this is important, and this is why I say that. It's because when I used to have this suspicion that Chaldea and Sumer was one and the same, or the Sumerians and the Chaldeans were the same. I had this suspicion because Godfrey Higgins. I read his books. He wrote these books in the 1830s, Anacalypsis, Volume 1 and 2, and then the Celtic Druids and stuff like that. And it's a very thick book with a lot of information about religion and stuff, and especially language and so on and so forth. So I had a suspicion, but I could never ever get anything to verify, right? Nothing from Oxford University or Penn State or British Museum or any of these respectable places, because they wouldn't actually come out and say it. Well, I have an 1873 Bible that I told you about, and I opened it up. In the beginning of it, I'm still going through it slowly, is basically the definitions that's used in the Bible, right? All the words, names, and so on and so forth. That's how I found out the Pope and Satan were one and the same, because in my 1873 Bible, it is that. Apollon, or however you say that individual's name, is known as Satan, which is also known as the Pope of Rome. I've already posted that up. It's on YouTube. It's in there. So, but going to, my Bible and understanding who all these individuals are, I had to find out the origins of everything. I literally had to find out the origins of everything, because it doesn't make sense when you look at something and look at it in the eyes that you understand it today and not how it was back then. So, I'm still stuck on the fact that, why did they crucify Jesus? Like, what was the main reason why?
I honestly believe it was because of the children and the saving of women. They're taking away their authority. So basically, freeing slaves was a no-go. That was an act of authority being rejected. So that was an act of rebellion. You see, people that were, even slaves that were running away, were crucified. So I also forgot with the mushroom thing. I just remembered. I think this belief traces back to around the 2nd century afterwards, to act with Marcion, because he got rejected after this, and he got in trouble for it. This is when he got rejected and excommunicated. He had a mass of, say, 10,000 Christians, maybe more, out in public, in the streets. What he did was he gave them a psychedelic wine. It was a mixing with magic mushrooms, basically. So they would drink this wine, and all of them were recorded to see Jesus descending from the heaven with his angels. So he was a Gnostic Christian as well, the man that compiled the first Christian Bible. So I think somewhere after that, these groups realized that they could contact the Christ through this psychedelic, or contact the angels, and belief would develop into that. But I didn't know that sort of stuff at first. That's something as I started studying in. So,
and the reason why I brought up Apollon and Pope of Rome and Chaldea and all that stuff is because when I open up my book and I go to Chaldea or Babylon or Sumer, it literally says that Chaldea and Sumer are one and the same. It literally says that. And that makes me wonder, because if Anu came from Egypt, right, and the oldest depicted star that we have comes from, from my understanding, when they reference the gods, is from Egypt. And if Chaldea is Sumer, and if Chaldea is the Akkadians, and so on and so forth, because that was the whole area. It wasn't known as, okay, let me put it like this. Instead of using the word Mesopotamia, it was known as Chaldea. That's what it was known. Like, they had a whole section of things. But then I wonder, where did the Chaldeans come from? Because the Ubadians actually inhabited the land of Sumer first, right? And they have artifacts and certain things that represent gods. That's where you get some of the quote unquote the reptilian like figures. It's from the Ubadians. A lot of people say it comes from the Sumerians, but the Sumerians didn't. No, they not. The Sumerians, there's very little information or stuff from the Sumerians themselves. A lot of it is broken up, deteriorated. Most of the stuff that we have that gives us the information that we know comes from the Akkadians, the Babylonians, and then
A
of
lot
course
of stuff got destroyed by ISIS as well regarding ancient statues and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah. So that's why I said for me, I have to go to the origins. So that means I have to go to the oldest representation of that mythology. I have to go to the oldest representation of that writing. I have to go to the oldest representation of that type of technology. You don't build we didn't start building motorized vehicles until after we went through bicycles, chariots, horses, camels, certain things, right? That's the earliest depiction or understanding of a transportation for humans are animals, elephants, giraffes, certain different things. Some people rode lions. There are African tribes that use lions for transportation, right? So for me, when it comes up to Jesus Christ, I wanted to know what was one of the first teachings that he gave people. And there's really not a first one that you can say that he actually gave that is
trustworthy. Because they're all not in order. And the oldest text we have is the Gospel of Thomas, but they're not going to be in canonical order. It's just a list of sayings, basically, of how this person that wrote it remembered it.
Exactly. So that's why, for me, no matter what, okay, whether people believe in Jesus or not, what was the teachings? And if these are made up stories in the Bible, which I'm pretty sure some of it is exaggerated and made up to the point where
there's something that Paul says about, I forgot what chapter it is in. It's basically do not take the Bible literally because they're allegories.
Yeah.
So spiritual meanings, gnosis, occult, esoteric, so his teachings would be mysticism, spirit involving all that,
And it goes back to being what demons are. Demons being known as wise men or honorable men who died. That's crazy. Because
and even the word magician comes from the word powerful, being magus, magi.
Exactly. Let me give you a prime example from what I've recently encountered. So there are individuals who argue that that God was a liar, and that the devil or Satan or the serpent was the truth teller. And one of the examples is that when Eve was about to eat from the tree of knowledge, God said, don't do it because you would die, right? And when the serpent came around, the devil, the Satan, or whatever you want to call him, that people would call it, told Eve that she wouldn't die, that she would be knowing what the gods knew, basically, right? She would have the same information that the gods would know, right? And when she did eat it, she didn't die, right? God came back and he said, who told you that? And this, that, and the third. We talked about that. Like an all-knowing God wouldn't even have to ask you.
That's right.
Who told you? He would already know. Why did the devil? He would probably popped up on the spot as soon as they took the first apple. But anyway, when you say that Jesus was a demon or a daemon, he in many ways went against what God said. Like I said, I talked about it earlier about the Sabbath. Being on different days, and if things needed to be done on a Sabbath, you would get it over with. You would do it, right? If you had to do something, and if it needed to be done, then do it, right? Just don't forget to pray and worship.
Especially eventually just for a day of rest. It was a day for free off for the lower classes. So they had a day off from the higher classes and had to be a slave for a day, or they didn't have to slave labor for the day or whatever. So
and that's why to me, it was I'm excited about the next conversation, because we're already going almost on 2 hours. I don't want to have this going on for too long and we go off. I think we should start the next one with, because we already talked about his teachings and so on and so forth. I think we should talk about more of the after effects of Jesus next. And then
Okay, no worries.
before that, let me ask you, did you go through all your notes? Because if not, I still have,
Yeah, I've gone through all my notes.
okay, perfect. Because I wanted to make sure we went through all your notes. I still have some notes that I have to go through, but that's because I like I said, I want to talk more about what, the afterlife and stuff like that. But I also want to go more into detail. So what I'm going to do this time is I'm going to write down 10 questions for you, and I want to send them to you prior to this, so we can
Okay.
talk about that stuff. Because this one was good, because we went through a lot of stuff. Like I said, man, no matter what, I cannot fathom why Jesus was crucified, especially if he was just trying to help people out. Like, and then, like how you was talking about the trafficking and all that bad stuff, it's crazy to think that, people were mad that he was bringing attention to the
Yeah.
negative idea of what was going on. Right. Like,
You're one of the first people that mentioned that. Most people try to defend it, unfortunately, which is horrible.
or ignore it altogether.
Yeah.
Right. So
Yeah.
I'm going to end this stream right now, but we're going to stay on here. Hey, I appreciate it, man. We had about 41 people in here listening to us.
Wonderful.
So next time I need you to send me, next time I'm just going to put up your Twitter page. Hey, check out.
Yeah, no worries. Share it all on there on the Facebook groups too.
So I want to say this. Look, follow Nathan, Spiritual Level of Being. He's on Twitter. He's on Facebook. He has his own YouTube channel. I've done plenty of discussions with him. Published author. You're a
priest as well now. I'm just on my doctorate degree now.
Yep, getting a doctorate
degree. 4 degrees. I've got 3 on my wall. Just waiting for that one to be sent to me and I can hang it up.
Yes, so knowledgeable man right here. I've known him for, I want to say, going on 2 years now. We've had discussions, and we bring our sources to the table. We don't bring our opinions unless we are asked, right? But we share what we've read, and he's doing some translations now, so that's good. So hey, give Spiritual Level a following. Man, I appreciate you coming, bro, and thanks for everybody for watching. All right, take it easy, guys.